Here we have Hannah Moloney, a popular landscape designer, permaculture designer, teacher, and TV presenter, and just recently author.
Yay.
So she's founder of The Good Life Permaculture. That's all about permaculture design in urban and rural areas, making community gardens and city farms, teaching and living a permaculture lifestyle, and also activism in every aspect from social to climate. She's also been a guest presenter for Gardening Australia on ABC TV. Apparently, I heard from my mum that you grew up in Brisbane and she used to buy herbs off your dad.
It's so beautiful. Such a small world. Yeah, we would have seen each other more, right? Yeah.
You're recently an author, so it's just come out. So congratulations about that.
Thank you.
It's called The Good Life. So how to grow a better world in the face of climate emergency. So can you tell us a bit about it and also when and where we can find it?
Thank you. Yeah, so it answers a big question of how to live a good life in the face of the climate emergency, which is something I've been grappling with since I was 14 years old, I reckon. So when I first learned about and was able to wrap my head around the politics of climate change and climate justice, and I got really, really worried about it all because, you know, it's a big deal and the science doesn't look good. And in my teenage years, I stumbled across permaculture, and that helped point me in the direction of a really positive way of life that can address these big, scary issues. So my book is very much around that, and it tells my personal story of how we do that here in Nipaluna in Hobart, Muwinina country, on a very steep property. So lots of practical insight into how we do things here, but also it shares, I guess, a more personal aspect about how to approach a life with hope. And we talk about radical hope when you have hope in the face of the huge uncertainty that is the climate emergency. And we talk about hope being courage and love in action. And so the book really grabs hold of that in a big way and shows how we do it, but how it can happen anywhere in the world by living through your values and really living through our humanity, I guess. And so it is focused on Australia context, but it is very much applicable anywhere in the world. So we highlight what we're doing, but we highlight what other people are doing around Australia. And we also talk about whole system change in the book, which is just acknowledging that we can't just all compost over here in a corner, and we can't just, you know, make our kimchi and sauerkraut. We do need to engage more broadly and be part of the collective. And that can be, you know, working with your school and community groups when you're able to vote as you get older. It can be as, you know, as small or as big as is appropriate for your context, but there's always a way to engage in the collective. So that's a big rambly answer.
Yeah, that sounds a lot like one of our terms that we made up, like practivism, so like practical, meaningful activism. So yeah. Also, like another one of your terms is like radical homemaking. So I've heard that in a few of your videos. Do you want to explain what that is and how that ties in?
Oh, great. Yes. And that term I was first aware of from an American author called Shannon Hayes, who wrote a book called Radical Homemaking. And I was reading her book many years ago. I was like, oh, this is gold. And it's very much about re-embracing the home. So right now, generally in our culture, people go to work 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. and we might hang out at home on the weekends, but usually we're out on the weekends anyway. But radical homemaking is about what happens if we center our home in the middle in our lives, and if appropriate, you work from home and you revitalize it to be an incredibly dynamic, productive and abundant space that can potentially provide your livelihood in some elements, and just reclaim all those skills that come along with that. So that's in the garden, in the shed, in the kitchen, it's all the things. And we embrace big elements of that, but we also embrace big elements of living in our community as well. So our daughter still goes to the local school. We do a lot of things which move toward what we call community sufficiency as opposed to self-sufficiency, which is quite a lonely, hard existence. So we're really interested in like how can we engage to create a really resilient community as opposed to just our own homestead here. So that's a big driving force for us. Yeah.
Yeah. So I really like about how like trying to move into a more community thing, you know, not just every man for themselves, but in that collective kind of thing. So, you know, with permaculture as well, and, you know, like, how do you like think that permaculture is a way for social and climate action, you know, basically like at the basics and also, you know, moving forward?
Oh, I think it's got such a key role to play. So I used to be involved in a lot of different types of frontline activism with forestry in particular in Lutruwita in Tasmania. And it was around that time where I really pivoted hard to permaculture, because in that time of activism, it was very much saying what we don't want, but it wasn't saying what we do want. And I think that's a really key missing link in a lot of activist conversations. I think it's so important to go, absolutely, we don't want this thing to happen for whatever reason. And the next part of the conversation is, this is how we could move forward. And I think permaculture is a wonderful design framework to start having those conversations, whether that's to do with landscape management or social issues. And of course, climate change is the issue talking about things. And I use permaculture as a lens to filter how I can communicate things. And of course, the 3 ethics are a wonderful guidepost to work from. So earth care, people care, and fair share. They can inform any social and environmental issue that is up in an activist arena. So I cheekily perhaps use permaculture as my form of activism. People often don't even realise they're being, you know, talked to in that way.
I think we do the same thing.
But what I noticed, a really great thing I noticed, as soon as I switched from, I don't want to say negative form of activism. I think every form of activism is good form of activism. So I want to be very clear about that. And I noticed when I switched to being very positive and solution orientated, a lot more people wanted to engage in those conversations. But again, I emphasize we need every type of activism. So don't hold back. Whatever is right for your context and your particular character, you go for it.
Yeah. So yeah, it's kind of like the evolution, revolution kind of thing. Yeah. So you mentioned like you were marching, you know, when you were younger. So, you know, how did you kind of get into this? Like, you know, you lead an amazing, almost dream life of, you know, having a permaculture business and being on TV and, you know, sharing that with other people. So, you know, what kind of shaped your youth and, you know, well, to get into that? And, you know, did you choose it or did it kind of just flow?
It's a great question. So I did grow up in a vibrant alternative community in West End, Kurilpa. And so I was surrounded by alternative thinking. So I have to acknowledge that was part of my everyday. I grew up on an urban herb nursery as well. So environmentally, I was aware of what's possible in small urban spaces. And my beautiful mother worked with the native title Aboriginal claims unit as a research librarian. So I was really aware of First Nations issues in Australia. It was very much part of our daily conversation. So by osmosis, all 5 kids in my family learnt a lot, which is really, I really value now. It's really sweet of you to say my life looks really dreamlike and amazing, and it is really great. But I really come to reflect on that a good life, I really do have a rich good life, it can be kind of talked about as quite a hard life as well. And as a young person, I very much was so perplexed by these big issues that we're still talking about today. And the only option I could see was to try to shape my life that could help counter them, which is what led me down this path. And it's not an easy path, you know, like it's not all, you know, yay, carrots and goats. It's a very emotionally engaged path where intellectually you're throwing everything you can at it to try to help things be better. And you feel all the highs and all the lows that comes with that. So I can't gloss over that. A life of activism is quite a hard life, but it is a very good life because you're living your values and you're living really deeply and richly. The connections that come with that through being really authentic is, you know, next to none. You can't give that up. So Again, another rambly answer for you, but it's so important to follow your gut is number one. So as a young adult, I didn't necessarily know where I was going as early days, but I knew that I had to try something different and to have a crack at living in a different way to what I could see in the mainstream world around us. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. So, what kind of, was there any particular people that inspired you? Like any mentors or?
Absolutely. Yeah, it was so great, actually. Great question. So when I was 18, I started traveling Australia. It ended up being a 3-year kind of moving feast, which is gorgeous. And in that process, I met my people, and they were fellow young people. So I think it's so critical to meet your community, and you'll find them. But meeting people at your similar age is really incredible as well. We were just talking earlier about how in the permaculture community sometimes it can be dominated by the older people, which is so awesome. We need our elders. And you need to find your peers, which is often in your age group. And it can help just join the dots. So I found my incredible community in South Australia, of all places. And I met amazing permaculture elders, Anne-Marie and Graham Brookman at the Food Forest. And when I met those two people, I was like, oh, permaculture is amazing, because Anne-Marie and Graham have one of the best permaculture farms. It's internationally renowned, incredible, and they happen to be wonderful humans. So they were able to show me that permaculture isn't just about gardening and farming, it's about how we are in the world socially and politically, how we engage with people. And Anne-Marie's an incredible artist, and so they were able to just show me how holistic permaculture is. So they were very much huge mentors for me in that time. I met them when I was 18, and they, to this day, are just like, wow, they're some of the coolest, kindest people I've ever met. So I think that time of life was a real game changer for me. I met Anne-Marie and Graham, and I met my community of dear friends who I still really love and just deeply respect. We did fantastic social activism together. We did all these great events together over a number of years. And that was really empowering to go, oh yeah, we can just do stuff. Oh, let's just try doing stuff. It's pretty cool. And some of it went really well, some of it flunked, and that's cool. But it was really empowering just to find spunky people up for it, having a crack.
Yeah. Yeah, so you said you traveled around a bit. What are some of the cool or, the amazing projects that you've been part of?
Oh, well, so in that time of living in Kaurna country in Adelaide, we did lots of different things around Tasmania Forest campaign, which was a national campaign at that time. So we did lots of street activism and huge performance art around engaging people in environmental conversations. We also ran what was called the Students of Sustainability Conference, which is a national conference that roams around the country every year. And that was like 800 people just camping out the local university oval. And David Holmgren came, co-founder of Permaculture, and I was like, oh, David's here. And there was just lots of things like that, which were really about bringing people together and having conversations and making new connections. And I do remember actually when we were organising those things, seeing some amazing people come who, hugely respected in the Australian community in sustainability and green politics. And they said, look around the room now, you're all quite young adults. These are the people that you'll be working with or alongside in your life, in the activist life. And they were so right. 20 years later, these are the people I still look to or I keep in touch with in some shape or form. And we're all doing our own things, but in the activist space, which is so gorgeous to see. Yeah. So keep in touch.
Yeah, that's amazing. I can imagine all of you who are here and who you connect with through this network.
Yeah.
You're going to grow up together knowing similar things and experiences.
Yeah. So with all this work that you're doing, what's kind of the future that you want to see happening?
That's a good question.
A few small questions.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have huge hope for the future. So in the context of the climate emergency, science does not look good, doesn't look positive. And in Australia, our political climate does not look hopeful. We have a very conservative government here, and we have a lot of big industry that holds a lot of sway with what happens with our resources, I guess. So with all that in my brain, I still have huge hope in humanity, because ultimately humans are inherently good, and we want to have a healthy, just world for our future generations. So this is the basis I work from. I have huge trust in humanity that we will rise to the occasion. I do not gloss over the hard facts, and I know there will be hard times to come, and I'm very interested in how we hold each other in those hard times. Like, how do we have those community safety nets, if you like, that we can catch each other and move through this chapter together. So I'm very interested in climate justice, where we can make sure we all move, ideally transition to a climate safe future together. So it's not just the few privileged people at the top who can be safe, but how can we all be safe and all have a really beautiful life together, rather than just leaving a lot of us behind. So I'm really interested in climate justice and how we can build capacity and have really, I guess, inclusive conversations. And I think a lot of that is around reclaiming our democracy, actually. So supporting people in your community to stand for politics, who can speak for your community in a really progressive, responsible way. And I think it's also about informal authority leaderships, where people can take hold of their their whatever's happening in their community. They can step into, create new networks that help build food security, or improve social inclusion, and make sure there's great connections happening between elderly and youth, and all these different things. There has never been a better time to step into being a leader. We are all leaders, and I think my biggest hope is that we can all remember how ordinary people are capable of doing extraordinary things when we choose to, I guess.
Yeah,
That's wonderful advice. I think it's really the key to it, isn't it? That that we all, wherever we are, can step up and speak up with whatever makes our heart sing and whatever moves us to do that work. So yeah.
So kind of scaling down to your plot, your land. So what have you got going on there? And how does Frida and Anton weave into this?
Yeah, no, great. We have a very full property here, so 3/4 of an acre. We have lots of perennial orchards and food forests. So most of our property is perennial, under fruit trees and berries and different shrubs. And then we have a big annual vegetable garden, but we also have some animals here. So we have chooks and bees and ducks. But we also have 2 milking goats who play a big part in my life. I love them very much. So every day I milk my goats, I tend the chickens, I check on the garden. So it's a big part of my daily pattern, if you like. And my partner Anton is very, we run this property together, so it's very shared. And our daughter is 6 years old, Frida Maria. So to her, it's just all normal. She's like, whatever, which is so beautiful. That's also how I grew up. But she's, she can milk a goat, no worries. She can catch some chickens, and she's really comfortable in that space, which I love seeing. And Anton, my partner, also works off-site. He runs an enterprise that imports secondhand electric cars, because with climate change in mind, we're very interested in what else can we do. So he and 2 other friends are looking at decarbonising transport for Australia. So that's a different, bigger scale, but it's very much part of how we live, I guess. We balance it all amongst our 2 businesses and our darling Frida Maria. Yeah.
Does Frida have any special things she likes to do in the garden, or just generally?
Always eat the things.
Yeah.
So she'll walk around with a little garden fork and dig out all the carrots, which is cool. I plant a lot of carrots.
Yeah.
But she is she's so comfortable just, eating everything that's available. And when her friends come over, she likes to, I think, maybe show off a little bit. Just good on her, and currently we're going through an elaborate stage of building fairy houses everywhere in the garden. So that's takes up quite a lot of time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, yeah, I used to do that a lot, but with peas, snow peas. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. So, yeah. Also, everyone else here, you're welcome to ask Hannah some questions. So, put them in the chat and we can do that. I have one last question for you, and it's, how are you so courageous to dye your hair pink? It's amazing and I love it.
Oh, it's hilarious. It's one of the easiest things I do. Oh, that is a good thing. I think at some point in my life, growing up the way I have grown up and trying to be the best activist I can, I spent a long time trying to blend in and look really normal. And realizing now, looking back, I never looked very normal because we are who we are. We just can't help but be ourselves, yes? And that should be embraced. And so at some point along the way, I went, oh, what happens if you're just your full, authentic self? Let's give that a go. and so that manifested in just not being so impacted by other people. I'm like, oh, I want to dye my hair pink. And it makes me incredibly happy. It is the most frivolous thing I do. It's completely unnecessary, and it brings me a lot of joy. Yeah.
Yeah. It looks great.
Oh, thanks, mate.
So Taj just got a question, and he says, how did you adapt with the weather in Tasmania after living in Brisbane?
Oh, great question. So growing up in Queensland, I was used to, that subtropical climate, and the summers get quite hot up there, especially when you're working outside. So as a young adult, I lived a bit in Northern Rivers, which is just south of Brisbane, on permaculture farms. And I just remember working in the summers and just dripping sweat. And when I first moved to southern Tasmania traveling, and I was working on different farms again, and the summers were just this dry heat. I was like, this is so easy. It was actually a huge relief, because I've always worked outside in some component, to be able to say goodbye to those hot, humid summers. So, saying that, we're in the middle of winter right now, and it does get cold. Like, it's weird to wear so many clothes for me. I grew up just half naked, and I didn't wear shoes until I went to school, and even that was like, you could take them off at school, and here we wear shoes all the time. So there is like a sadness there. That beautiful Queensland lifestyle, I guess, is not part of our life here, but we've got other beautiful things. Nowhere is perfect, everywhere is amazing, so we just embrace that.
We've got another question from Brooke, and in regard to what you were talking about earlier about finding your people, were there times that you felt quite lonely because you couldn't find people with the same values? I'm 23 and I'm still searching. Haha.
Yeah, so totally resonate. Yes, I just felt so misunderstood, I guess, by the people around me. I couldn't connect with people, and as a young person, I assumed there must be something wrong with me, which is not true. There's nothing wrong with you or us. And the way I started finding my people was by finding the groups doing the things in that region. These days we've got the internet, so we didn't have the internet back then. But like joining groups and getting involved in activities was a really big thing, and really empowering and really fun. So it gave us a shared way to be together. We didn't have to just, have light chit chat. You go, okay, we're going to do this national conference, awesome. And then you have these beautiful connections that develop through that process. That to me was a huge learning, because I'm actually quite a big introvert. So I don't just want to go out and make light chit chat. I actually want to do really meaningful things with people I really value and who really value me. So that was my personal way of finding those people. And of course, once you're in a network, word of mouth or the internet, it helps connect you with more and more people. So even introverts like us, like myself, can have a crack. You just got to find what suits you, and don't give up, because the people are there. They just might not be next door, living next door to you, but they're in your region somewhere. Yeah.
Thank you. So I've got another question. Do you have any tips for those who don't know much about permaculture? Is there anywhere to volunteer in Australia to learn and experience permaculture?
Oh, yeah, it depends where you are in Australia, because it's quite a huge country. There's lots of different local permaculture groups, and so you can go on Permaculture Australia, and I'm sure through this network they can also help you connect depending where you are. But most people will enter permaculture through organic gardening, and that's a great entryway. So you can get involved in community gardens or different city farms, depending where you might be, and even land care, like we'll have beautiful tree planting days, and there's different people who be involved in those networks that will definitely help connect those dots. In other parts of Australia, there's what we call permablitzes that run, which is a voluntary system where you can help build a food garden in someone's home, and of course make lots of new friends in that process. And so you just kind of put your feelers out and see what's happening. And sometimes there's workshops running in your region as well. So and sometimes they're free, sometimes you have to pay, but there's always a way to not pay, don't worry. There's always a way to learn things. And depending where you're at in life, you can do woofing, which is willing workers on organic farms. It's a way to stay at a farm or an urban space and volunteer in exchange for board and food and company to learn different things. So but of course, permaculture is so much more than gardening. So if you're really interested in politics or, social community development, you can hone in that skill set and start to seek out people working in that area as well. Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. And also from Chloe, hi Hannah, I'm wondering how old you were when you did your PDC and who you did it through.
Yeah, that's such a cool question. I didn't do my PDC until I was 24-ish, I think, with Rick Coleman, who was based in Victoria at that time, but he had travelled to Tasmania where I was living, and so I did it in Tasmania. But I've been working with permaculturists for 6 years by that time, and I've been working on their permaculture farms and helping to support other people teach. I wasn't teaching at all then. I was like, I don't need a PDC. I know what's going on. And then I did one. I was like, oh, that was really great. And it completely changed my life, actually. That was after I did my PDC, I officially resigned from working with the Wilderness Society and forest campaigns. And I at that stage, I was doing part-time forest activism work and part-time school gardening work. And I went full-time school gardening and then started building up more permaculture-related work. It was so profound in terms of joining the dots in my head between land management, politics, social systems, community networks. It just was, all the pennies dropped in a good way. I was like, oh, that's what I should be doing. It was a great 2 weeks of intensive thinking, and it really helped me align my values with how I wanted to live. So not to be underestimated. Yeah.
Thanks, Chloe, for that question. Great. Yeah. Oh, there's more questions.
Another one from Brooke. I've recently graduated from an MA in environmental advocacy and have done a PDC, but I'm finding there aren't many jobs out there. They're more environmental engineering or science, etc. So basically wondering if you knew of any jobs my degree would suit or places I should search in New South Wales.
Blue Mountains.
Yeah, the Blue Mountains have got a great network up there. So I think definitely connecting with permaculture networks is a first step, because then you meet the people, they meet you, they're aware of your skill set, and good things will happen. I do have to acknowledge that it's tricky in the permaculture movement to go and get a professional job and just apply, because there are not many around. I set up my own business because I couldn't find a job. And I've created work for people along that way, which has been so heartening. But not everybody wants to set up their own work or work for themselves. And so, but I do think you have to think a bit more creatively and go, okay, it's not a job. Don't necessarily look for jobs called permaculture jobs, but go, how can I bring my skill set? If you've got your PDC, you've got all these diverse different skill sets into that environmental engineering job, if that's what you want to do. or how can that skill set go into a different space, which with those skills being transferred, because you'll have so many transferable skills, so many. How can you think a bit more creatively for where they could be? And it might be a combination of paid work and some voluntary work initially, just to fill in any skill gaps that you need to. But I think the most important thing is that you just start having a crack and don't settle for a safe job because you go, oh, well, that's it. You just got to keep going. With our world and with the conversations that we're having within permaculture and beyond around climate change, we just have to start trying, remembering our bravery and just be a bit more courageous with how we want to live, and just having a crack and go, okay, what I want to do isn't there. How can we start building that thing or creating these opportunities for myself and for other people? So always thinking about how we can bring others with us, even if that's a long game. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I've got a question about your goats and how you manage food for them, because I think how many acres did you say you're on?
We've got less than 1 acre, so it's 3/4 of an acre.
Yeah. How do you manage food for them? Because
Great question.
When we lived in Tassie, we lived in the Rinna, we had a lot of trouble managing 3 big goats.
Yeah. So especially when you're milking goats, they'll eat a lot of food because they're lactating. So we buy in food from a local farm for like mixed chaff, so oat and loosened chaff. It looks like straw. So it's got good nutrients, and some rolled barley also from local farm. But I cut fodder for them every day. So that's in summertime and autumn, it's all from our property because everything's growing so prolifically. In wintertime, I'll ride my electric bike just down the road to the state forest, which has got lots of weedy understory growing, and I cut the weeds down and I drag it back behind my bike and I give that to them most days. And so they have a really consistent feed with their chaff and barley grain, but then they have diversity in their fresh fodder every day because they need that diversity to be healthy. We also have a mineral lick for them so they can access minerals as needed. And so you have to kind of think about all the different things that goats need. Goats are really particular. Like, people think they'll eat anything. They're so fussy. They're so picky. So I work really hard to make sure they're happy. It's interesting because we have such a small space. It's what we call a high input system, our goat area, which is not recommended in permaculture design. We want low input systems with high yields, but our goats are high input systems with high yields. And that was a really active choice because I wanted to have ethical dairy, which I couldn't access at the time. So I chose to go, I'm going to put in more work, my time, and buy in some of their food. That means I have really happy animals, really ethical dairy. And of course, we cycle all the manure back into our landscape for our nutrient cycling. So there's a lot of different benefits there. But good question. Yeah, there are a lot of work, not to be taken lightly.
We got time for one last question. So yeah, Ellenie, go.
Yes. So I also have a question about your goats. And do you do cell grazing, or do you just have them in like one area and then bring in the food like you said you did?
Yeah, we have one area. So they're not on pasture. Their one area is like a big yard, and it's on wood chips. And then we tether them. We've got some grassy or weedy areas we tether them when I'm at home. And then I cut fresh fodder and I carry it into their yard. So this is a really uncommon system you won't see much in Australia. So I know 3 of us in different parts who do it, but usually you'd have them on pasture or in shrubbery area. You graze them through areas. And if you might have a central shed that you can milk in, etc. But it's so interesting to think about. You look around the world, most people have livestock in their house or next door to their house very tightly. So in Australia, it's a bit different here. We've got a lot more space, and it's really rare to have people. I live in the city. I'm just 3 k's from the city centre, to have goats this close. But we can do it if you manage it well. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you. There's a few more questions in the chat, but we don't really have time to go through them. But would you like to tell people how they can get involved with all your stuff? Oh, sure. Look, we're based in Lutruwita, Tasmania, so not near most of you, I imagine. But we do have a website with lots of free resources on there, so you're welcome to scour through and
read about goats, whatever you're interested in. And I guess, actually tomorrow I'm launching a new YouTube thing that we're doing. So every Monday, I'm just going to put out a free video on our YouTube channel, and it's all about building climate resilience in your home and community. So lots of practical tips. Tomorrow I'll put our first one out, which is a bit of a tour of our winter garden. So that's another way you can kind of keep in touch. And I've got my book coming out on the 31st of August as well, which is another resource along these lines. So that's different things you can pop into if you're keen.
Yeah, thank you so much for being part of this today. And
pleasure.
So I believe that slam poetry can connect individuals in an amazing way that really makes you feel heard. And I would love to connect with you all today with a new poem I've written called Tenderness of Cranes. I stand in the new light of the harvest moon, divinely superfluous beauty I will not tire of anytime soon. Something utterly wild creeps into my mind. The earth and the sky need each other, but what about humankind? Where do we fit in within this complex puzzle standing in the dark? Enveloped with a soft caress, I wade through question marks. I look back along the stars raised at the beautiful dawns of time. Human civilization, the spoiler responsible for nature's broken balance, decline. As I live and breathe, another question pops up. Who is running the show? Will I ever know as I stare at the lineup? This earth is all we get, no reset button, no downloadable upgrade. We can't trade the earth for one of those easy to buy prepaids. We get one shot at this, so dismiss all reports of a second chance. We are forced with a seemingly impossible task. The magnitude of what's before us seems bigger than Earth itself. How do we save the world? I question myself. To save the world is not a punishment, it's a responsibility. I think of how a single drop of rain was meant to make the world clean again, irrespectively. I look down and see the footprint I leave in the dirt, coming to the realization that Mother Earth's charity won't last forever unhurt. Nothing is more important, more precious than our earth, our home. We are facing a crisis that waits for no man, no woman. We need to come together as this crisis rests on shoulders of mankind. Our strength will come from staying together, linking arms, hearts, and minds. Write new stories we can tell our grandchildren while sitting upon the mountain range, how we acted as one, working as agents of change, sharing the realization that all species are related to each other, that we all have evolved together, the birds and bees, our sisters and our brothers. Tell the stories of how the sun heats the soil feeds the plants, the flowers feed the birds, the rain feeds the trees. All beings nourish each other, all beings are equally important across the 7 seas. The sky is bright blue, the sun pushing its way through scattered unborn clouds, creating an illusion of a nice day against the backdrop of haze, doubt, and confused crowds. It is the union of you and me that there is light in the sky undeterred. One left wing and one right wing belong to the same bird. Spreading the compost of kindness and watering it with generosity. Irrigating the soil of our souls with a sprinkling of curiosity. Changing to a human doing rather than a human being cruising on factory settings. I've always stayed within the lines when colouring in my life, just settling. But now I'm prepared to let things get messy with paint all over my face. We are all made of flesh and stars becoming dust in the end without a trace. So I best shine while I can and sow the seeds of love with the hands of humility. The world, the universe is one being, a single organism in tranquility. So I take a moment and think of what I can do to give back to the earth. So I sit on the edge of the lake making paper cranes, knowing I'm not the first. Have you ever wondered why, as you look at the sky? What makes you smile? What makes it all worthwhile? Tolerant like the horizon, firm like the mountains, and supple like a tree in the wind. Nurture our soul, our soil, and our society, all in balance within. Thank you.
This is DPSJ number 1, presenting Vegetable Song. Sound Director
Scarecrow Beats. nature. On vegetable we have some vitamin. On vegetable we have some protein.
Mboga mboga ni muhimu hasa kwa binadamu. Sukuma, lenga lenga na vingine ni muhimu kwa tajiri maskini, sote tule mboga mboga. Vegetable chakula bora, wakulima wanalima. Mama zetu sokoni wanauza kupitia Permaculture, mango matunda mazuri. Mboga mboga kali kali tena bila kemikali. Permaculture ni kilimo hatari.
Sisi wakulima twajivunia mboga 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 zetu twajipatia. Sisi wakulima wote twajivunia mboga 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 zetu twajipatia. Sisi wakulima wote twajivunia mboga 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 zetu twajipatia. Sisi wakulima wote twajivunia mboga 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 zetu twajipatia. Mboga mboga wakulima wote twajituma. Kujituma kwetu sisi twapata faida. Mboga mboga wakulima wote twajituma. Kujituma kwetu nchi yapata faida. Mboga mboga wakulima wote twajituma. Kujituma kwetu sisi twapata faida. Mboga mboga wakulima wote twajituma. Kujituma kwetu nchi yapata faida.
Kwenye njaa mazao yatupata kushiba. Legendary Ogran kwetu weni hero. Permaculture, our motto is to rescue people from hunger, especially the African continent. We work and fight together to rescue our world. Europa, Asia, America, let us help the new generation.
Sisi wakulima twajivunia mboga 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 zetu twajipatia. Sisi wakulima wote twajivunia mboga 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 zetu twajipatia. Sisi wakulima wote twajivunia mboga 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 zetu twajipatia. Sisi wakulima wote twajivunia mboga 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 zetu twajipatia. Mboga mboga wakulima wote twajituma. Kujituma kwetu sisi twapata faida. Mboga mboga wakulima wote twajituma. Kujituma kwetu nchi yapata faida. Mboga mboga wakulima wote twajituma. Kujituma kwetu sisi twapata faida. Mboga mboga wakulima wote twajituma. Kujituma kwetu nchi yapata faida.
Kila kitu tunapata toka Permaculture, mboga mboga tamu kama vile matembele. Binadamu ongeza damu kupitia lenga lenga. Mzenu mina dunda kupitia imatunda. Nikipata imazao familia ya furahi. Cheni mini lime nipate mboga mboga. Mina mona wime analima mboga mboga. DPSJ ya tutakopa tuko Permaculture tunajita namba moja.
Sisi wakulima twajivunia mboga 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 zetu twajipatia. Sisi wakulima wote twajivunia mboga 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 zetu twajipatia. Sisi wakulima wote twajivunia mboga 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 zetu twajipatia. Sisi wakulima wote twajivunia mboga 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 zetu twajipatia. Mboga mboga wakulima wote twajituma. Kujituma kwetu sisi twapata faida. Mboga mboga wakulima wote twajituma. Kujituma kwetu nchi yapata faida. Mboga mboga wakulima wote twajituma. Kujituma kwetu sisi twapata faida. Mboga mboga wakulima wote twajituma. Kujituma kwetu nchi yapata faida. Sisi twapata faida. Nchi yapata faida. Sisi twapata faida. Nchi yapata faida.
Okay, so I introduced myself and my rescue horses, and now I'll just go through the slide. So horses, goats, sheep, cows, and alpacas can all be integrated into the permaculture system. The thing I love about permaculture is you can kind of integrate anything in there, and it will go if you're clever. And when managed well, horses and all these other beautiful livestock can enhance the farm and help with regenerative practices in a diverse system. So diversity, I talk about a lot in this slideshow, is kind of the key to resilience. And that's something I've been looking at quite a lot recently. So all things have imports and exports in a permaculture system, and all things in nature and existence too. The imports and exports help to balance and diversify the farm. By looking at an animal's needs and behaviors, we can help them make them more resilient and sustainable. So by using all those imports and exports, we can make it a really balanced system. So pasture management is kind of where it all starts. So it's really important for the health of your horses and all farm animals. Using rotational grazing, which is something that we're starting to get into, and we're mixing the grasses with herbs and other things, because horses are not actually only grazers. They also eat small branches, twigs, herbs, and a lot of other things, which helps them have a diverse diet. And it's kind of quite bad for the horse's digestion just to be eating grass. So diversity is really important. So healthy pastures make healthy horses. With variety, the horses become more resilient to worms and other parasites. For example, if a horse has too many worms in its stomach, he can go and eat some wormwood or have some garlic from the paddock. And so he is able to find all the different things he needs in his own yard. So when we bring as much of the natural living conditions of horses as possible into this human-created environment for them, the happier they are. So with trees, trees make a really great shelter in horse paddocks. We're going to plant a few more in our paddock, and there's a few already. But with trees in your horse's paddock is protection from the elements, so they can go there when it's raining or when it's really hot or when they need to, and also helps diversify the pasture. So when it's really hot, they stand under the tree, lay under the trees, and then they also rub their winter fur off on the bark because it's kind of like a comb. And then forage trees can be planted on the boundary fence. So there's a boundary fence and then the trees are there. So the horses can eat carob or tagasaste and just nibble along the fence line, which is a similar thing you can do with goats. So healthcare, so horses are notoriously expensive when it comes to looking after them and keeping them healthy. But it just really doesn't have to be like that if you're trying to keep it as natural and as sustainable as possible. So with a balanced diet and mineral supplementation and variety, you can help avoid illness. So we use copper supplements and garlic for intestinal worms and diatomaceous earth for lice, which are all natural things instead of having to fill our horses with chemicals. So hoof care can be done naturally without needing shoeing, which is putting big metal things on your horse's feet. And your horse is more likely to have stronger, healthier feet when they are being correctly barefoot trimmed. So horses produce 20 kilograms of manure a day, which is a lot of manure. And where I live, we have really, really degraded soil. The land where I'm on was logged and then cattle grazed, and then all the topsoil has been taken off to build our house. So we really need to build up our soil. And because I'm not very good at composting, I like composting straight into the garden bed. And I do this by putting the horse manure in, mixing it with a bit of straw, and then leaving it just to sort of sit for a while until it starts to break down. And it breaks down really fast because it's just chewed up grass that's kind of half made into compost. So we're taking, by taking the manure out of the paddock and then putting it in the garden, we're helping keep the worm populations down the paddock as well. So what can we do with horses? A lot of people kind of think horses, yeah, you just ride them and you get some manure. but they are such diverse, amazing animals and have so many wonderful things you can do with them. So obviously you can ride them around instead of cars or bikes. They can be used to draw logs in sustainable forestry. So instead of driving a car or a truck through the forest, you can have a horse with logs, drawing logs. They can be drawing carts. So instead of like a bike with a bike trailer, you can have a horse with a horse cart. When you're doing farm tours or touring around the area, a horseback tour is magical because, you know, you're on the horseback and you're really feeling like you're there. You're not kind of in a car looking out the window. And horses are really beautiful companions and they're very special friends. So systems, I've kind of talked a lot about a three-way system of integration, rotation, and balance. The main themes of these can be integrated in any system, from animals to gardens to communities. So a herd mindset of integration and balance can be used in a shared paddock situation. We have a friend who's going to put their horses in the paddock with ours, so they're going to be sharing and eating together and just making a larger herd. So having others there mean you can help to build fences, help planting trees, and making it more abundant using diversity. So diversity makes resilience. In other words, the more the merrier. So protection for natural habitat is also really important because in a lot of areas, livestock really, really degrade the land. So horses should be kept kind of off rivers. So by planting kind of prickly bushes or fences, you should stop them going into the river and planting trees near the rivers or ponds to avoid fertility going into the water. So they shouldn't be let on sort of sensitive slopes because they can damage it with their feet. And so again, fencing or thick bush, and using rotation, you can stop compacting the soil. So these are my horses. The golden horse is Lilybell, and she is a pony who came to us after we bought her. She's our first horse, and she had quite a bit of a rough past. She's been kind of roughed around a lot, and so coming here, she's really getting to be herself. We have this little foal who's in the middle. Her name is Velvet, and we don't really know much about her. When she came to us, she was completely wild. If you went in the paddock with her, she'd gallop off the other end. Really, really wild. And now she comes over for a cuddle and a hug, and she's really, really sweet. And then in the last photo is Schiller, and Schiller is an ex-racehorse. Horse racing in Australia is a really rough training system and quite cruel. So he is quite emotionally damaged. We're helping to make him happy. So that's that.